Item 687. Pedestal pole assemblies. 1. Description. Installation. Furnish and install pedestal pole assemblies for vehicle and pedestrian signals. Relocation. Remove and relocate existing pedestal pole assemblies. Removal. Remove existing pedestal pole assemblies. 2. Materials. Furnish new materials in accordance with the following items and with details shown on the plans. Item 445, galvanizing. Item 449, anchor bolts. Item 656, foundations for traffic control devices. 2.1 Pedestal pole base. Provide pre-qualified pedestal pole bases from the department's MPL in accordance with DMS 11140, pedestal pole base. 2.2 Pedestal pole. Provide 4 inches diameter Schedule 40 steel pipe or tubing, aluminum pipe, alloy 6061 T6, or rigid metal conduit. Do not use aluminum conduit. Galvanize pedestal pole assemblies in accordance with Item 445, galvanizing, unless otherwise shown on the plans. 2.3 Pedestrian push-button pole assembly. Provide diameter as shown on the plans, Schedule 40 steel pipe or tubing, aluminum pipe, alloy 6061 T6, or rigid metal conduit. Do not use aluminum conduit. Galvanize pedestrian push-button post in accordance with Item 445, galvanizing, unless otherwise shown on the plans. 3. Construction. Install foundations in accordance with Item 656, foundations for traffic control devices. 3.1 Pedestal pole base. Ground the base with connectors to the 1/2-13 NC female threaded hole. Fabricate the base for 4 L-bend anchor bolts arranged in a square pattern with a 12 3/4 inches bolt circle. Provide mild steel anchor bolts in accordance with Item 449, anchor bolts, for each base. Provide 3 1/16 inches thick and 3 1/8 inches thick U-shaped galvanizing steel shims for each base. Size shims to fit around the anchor bolts. 3.2 Installation. Install pedestal pole assemblies and pedestrian push-button post assemblies as shown on the plans, or as directed. Pedestal pole assemblies include foundation, pole shaft, base, anchor bolts, anchor bolt nuts, anchor bolt template, shims, and miscellaneous components. Watertight breakaway electrical disconnects are required for pedestal pole assemblies used in conjunction with vehicle and pedestrian heads and components. Pedestrian push-button post assemblies include foundation, pole, and post cap. Use established industry and utility safety practices to erect assemblies near overhead or underground utilities. Consult with the appropriate utility company before beginning such work. Repair damaged galvanizing in accordance with Section 445.3.5, repairs. 3.3 Relocation. Disconnect and isolate the electrical power supply before removal of the assembly. Remove existing assembly as directed. Salvage existing components such as signs, heads, buttons, pole, and base unless otherwise directed. Repair or replace lost or damaged components as directed. Install foundations in accordance with Item 656, foundations for traffic control devices. Relocate existing assembly to the location shown on the plans or as directed. Install existing assembly at new foundations in accordance with Section 687.3.2, installation. Remove existing foundations in accordance with Section 687.3.4, removal. Accept ownership of unsalvageable materials, as determined by the engineer, and dispose of in accordance with federal, state, and local regulations. Repair galvanizing for any damaged steel part or any steel part welded after galvanizing in accordance with Item 445, galvanizing. 3.4 Removal. Disconnect and isolate electrical power supplies before removal of the assembly. Remove existing sign panel, beacons, pole, and base from existing assembly. Store items to be reused or salvaged without damaging them. Store sign panels above the ground in a vertical position at locations shown on the plans or as directed. Accept ownership of unsalvageable materials and dispose of in accordance with federal, state, and local regulations. Disconnect and remove conductors from abandoned circuits. Remove abandoned conduit and ducts to a 0.6 inches below final grade. Destroy existing transformer bases to prevent reuse. Remove abandoned foundations to 2 feet below the finished grade unless otherwise shown on the plans. Cut off and remove steel protruding from the remaining concrete. Backfill the remaining hole with material equal in composition and density to the surrounding area. Replace any surfacing with like material to equivalent condition. 3.5 Painted finish. When required, paint pedestal pole and pedestrian push-button post assemblies in accordance with details shown on the plans. For measurement. This item will be measured by each pedestal pole assembly or each pedestrian push-button post assembly installed, relocated, or removed. 5 Payment. The work performed and materials furnished in accordance with this item and measured as provided under measurement will be paid for at the unit price bid for install pedestal pole assembly, install pedestrian push-button post assembly, relocate pedestal pole assembly, relocate pedestrian push-button post assembly, remove pedestal pole assembly or remove pedestrian push-button post assembly. New signal heads will be paid for under item 682. Vehicle and pedestrian signal heads. 5.1 Installation. This price is full compensation for furnishing and installing the shaft, base, shims, anchor bolts, and foundation, and materials, equipment, labor, tools, and incidentals. 5.2 Relocation. This price is full compensation for removing the pedestal pole or pedestrian push-button assemblies, removing existing foundations, installing new foundations, furnishing, fabricating, and installing any new components as required and replacing the assembly on its new foundations with all manipulations and electrical work, controller, salvaging, disposal of unsalvageable material, loading and hauling, and equipment, material, labor, tools, and incidentals. 5.3 Removal. This price is full compensation for removing the various pedestal pole assemblies components, removing the foundations, storing the components to be reused or salvaged, disposal of unsalvageable material, backfilling and surface placement, loading and hauling, and equipment, materials, tools, labor, and incidentals.